Good morning and welcome to the all-new 2-hour, frankly speaking, here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Be careful what you wish for, because we're going to try to do 2 hours this morning, and I think we have, as you can tell here, plenty to talk about. So I hope everyone had a very nice Easter, and we're going to get right to it. I should also mention, just quickly, that we are changing the format a little bit as well. So not quite as many commercial breaks, a little more time to sit back and relax and have a nice conversation. You see the number on the bottom of your screen. We received 2 waves already this morning. And also a good morning and congratulations on day 1 of the expanded version of Frankly Speaking. Well, thank you very much. Hope you won't regret giving us another hour event. No, I will not. I can't wait. And to your point, at the end of this, we're going to talk about this. I hope you had a nice Easter. Did you celebrate Transgender Visibility Day? Big story out there in the news. And thank you for the comment. And thank you for the congratulations. We are going to talk about that. The president, if you're not aware, wished everyone a happy Transgender Visibility Day. The Governor Hochul as well. Nancy Pelosi jumping on it. A lot of, I guess you would say, left politicians talking about that instead of or in addition to Easter. So we'll be talking about that as well. First, here's an update just to start on a very oddball story. Last week, we talked about it for weeks now, but last week we discussed these squatters' rights issues. And Assemblyman Phil Palmisano has a bill, along with others, and I can't remember who else is on the bill, giving property owners rights, focusing and standing up for the property owners. I know it seems ridiculous, I guess, but we appreciated what the Assemblyman put forward, and so we talked about it quite extensively last week. Well, listen to this. Out of New York City, a pair of alleged squatters accused of unlawfully moving into a Queens duplex are suing its rightful owners after refusing to vacate the $930,000 home. It's the latest logic-defying chapter in the ongoing squatter saga in the Bureau, which in recent weeks has seen multiple homes occupied by unwelcome invaders who claim rights to the property under New York City's permissive laws. It's absolutely absurd, said the owner of the latest targeted home, Julia Fullman, who so far has racked up more than $4,000 in legal bills just to fight this lawsuit. Quote, "These people literally broke into my house. It's not fair to us as homeowners that we are not protected by the city. Within the 5 bureaus, squatters need only to occupy a property for 30 days before a wide range of legal protections kick in that make it difficult for the owner to evict them. You can't really even blame them in a way because it's handed to them on a silver platter," said Julia's husband. "Something needs to be done because the issue is only getting worse. People are taking advantage of these laws, manipulating the laws, and our hands are tied. What did we do? Nothing. We put up a property for rent, and that's it. Now we're dealing with a nightmare." I don't bring it up to laugh. I mean, this is getting out of control. So now they are being sued. The rightful owners of the property are being sued by alleged squatters because the squatters will not leave their home. It's unbelievable. Leave it to New York and elsewhere, but leave it to New York to have these type of laws in place. So thank you again to Assemblyman Phil Palmisano for putting forth that bill to crack down and actually support property owners. Okay. Wow, we have so much time. I just feel like we're getting settled in. Normally I'm rushing now, and instead I'm taking it nice and slow. I like this. I like it a lot. Feel free to comment at any time. This is the brand new 2-hour edition. Thank you for setting your alarms and being a part of it. So ex-Governor David Patterson, speaking of New York, we're going to start with some New York issues. He was on 770 WABC over the weekend, the radio station. He ripped into Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie for refusing to back a law to toughen up criminal sentences for violent shoplifters and other thugs who assault retail workers. You know, you've got to think about this. There's been so much of this in the news. It's got to be scary to work in retail in New York. Always maybe on edge. There's so many shoplifters. We saw what happened over the weekend right here in our own backyard with that police officer attacked. And that was to, if I understand the story right, they were there to crack down on shoplifting. Quote, I don't really understand that. I was kind of surprised he appeared to say this, David Patterson said. Hasty argued last week that increasing penalties, as proposed by Governor Hochul, won't reduce crimes. Quote, I just don't believe raising penalties is ever a deterrent to crime. Well, so maybe there shouldn't be any penalties, right? It's just going back to what the last article said. It is logic defying at times. Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins has sided with Hasty, saying she preferred other avenues to combat shoplifting than stiffening sentences. But David Patterson said he was shocked by Hasty. Quote, these are people who are not high-wage earners. Most of them are not unionized. When people come in to rob the stores, that there should be any leniency for this type of thing, I really don't understand it. Hasty is a very good friend of mine, a very decent person. I'd like to have this conversation with him one-on-one. Now, Hochul's budget called for a crackdown on an explosion of retail theft, including jacking up penalties for people who assault retail workers, as well as investments in state police and district attorney teams to go after the biggest crooks. So we've talked about what this means for New York. I mean, there's so many examples of why businesses would not want to come to New York or why they're leaving New York. This is just another example where we've heard of stores just closing up, leaving the state because they can't deal with the costs of this rampant shoplifting. The chaos must stop, Hochul said in her State of the State address. Patterson agreed, saying, putting offenders behind bars longer means they won't commit more crimes and are less likely to do so when they're released because they're older. Well, yeah, I mean, there is no penalty. Why? What would stop people from shoplifting, essentially? We talked about it with, especially when it had when it dealt with young people in New York City. It was almost Charles Dickens-esque, where young kids were going around pickpocketing and robbing, and when the bar owners would say, we're going to call the cops, they said, so what? There's an article at the Post. What do we care? There's not going to be any real penalty. Oh, here's a nice comment. Happy to see this wasn't just an April Fool's joke. Boy, I don't know. When that alarm went off this morning, I kind of wish it would have been. No, we're just getting into the swing of things, getting used to the new time, and I love it. 2 hours of Frankly Speaking here on WIDC TV, Big Fox. So I'm loving it. So it's like a revolving door, said Patterson. There's no opportunity for any type of rehabilitation. There's no opportunity for contrition with the parole board. People like myself, who have always been advocates for a fair trial for people, not let the deck get stacked against them as it used to be in the past, are having to recognize that there's going to have to be greater sense of punishment than there is right now. Patterson said he heard from Hasty recently, who told him, perhaps only half in jest, that he sounded more like a Republican. I was coming out of the WABC studio, and I get in my car and someone calls. I pick up the phone, and the voice says to me, when are you changing your registration to Republican? It was Carl Hasty. I said, Carl, I've been trying to call you for 3 months, and you haven't returned my call. If this is what it takes, I'll sign up tomorrow. Yeah, I wouldn't say that Patterson was a Republican, but is that really? I mean, I guess as Republicans wear that as a badge of honor. Are you just common sense on crime, on penalties? You must be a Republican. It is amazing. I know I talked about it with the Assemblyman, and I've talked about it on this program a lot. Just from a political PR standpoint, people, I guess they're so confident that we're always going to vote Democrat. But from a PR standpoint, you would think that many of these people in Albany would want to get tough on crime. Because right now, immigration and public safety are number one and number two when it comes to voter concern. Immigration, I think, recently went to number one. But you would think, I mean, Governor Hochul almost learned her lesson on it. I know now that's why she, quote unquote, talks tough. I had a piece, and I don't think it printed out this morning, that she's trying to claim that she was very tough when it came to bail reform, and she's wanted to overturn it. And I'm trying to see if I can find it. Well, I'll search for it when we take our first break. But yeah, suggesting that she is tough on crime, that she isn't coddling the criminals and tying the hands of law enforcement. Interesting. But she learned her lesson in a way. I mean, she's not really doing anything about it. But when Lee Zeldin did so well, because he did run on public safety, ran on people's real, legitimate fears for their family and their own safety. So I'll see if I can find that as we take our first break. Yes, our first break on the 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. So stay right there. We'll be right back. Our beautiful view of a very early look at Market Street here as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on the all-new 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us, getting the cobwebs out this morning and getting started. Okay. So tying in with what I was just mentioning, I was trying to look for that quote from Governor Hochul claiming that she's been trying to overturn bail reform. Higher penalties for retail theft, which we were just talking about, is among the issues making the state budget late again. New York state lawmakers are on a 4-day break for the Easter holidays while they let the budget deadline pass. One of the many sticking points remaining in the spending plan is how to crack down on growing instances of retail theft. Now, this is interesting because we had the piece last week, and I think it's a really good point. Once they move the deadline to April 4th, then there's an air of complicity, whatever word you want to use. It's 6 o'clock. Bear with me. I think you'll see more and more pushes of the deadline. It doesn't seem as if they're anywhere near a final budget. Governors in New York often include unrelated policy items in their state budget proposals, and Governor Hochul is no exception. That's when they have the most leverage with the legislature to get their agenda approved. Hochul is proposing new, stiffer penalties for retail theft, including making it a felony to assault a store employee. She held a news conference with small retail store owners earlier in March. Quote, "These individuals are very exposed, especially in a small shop with just one worker. They don't have any way to protect themselves. They're literally on the front line. And under this law, assaulting a retail worker would carry the same elevated penalties that we have in place for assaulting a first responder. It's part of a $45 million plan that includes authorizing the state police to investigate and prosecute interstate and international organized retail theft rings. Hochul wants to spend $25 million of that amount to hire more troopers. But Democrats in the Senate and Assembly are reluctant to increase criminal penalties. Neither house included the new criminal penalties in their budget plans. Both leaders of the legislature are African American, and they have said repeatedly that they are wary of any criminal justice law changes that could disproportionately impact black and brown New Yorkers. Senate Majority Leader Andrew Stewart Cousins said there are better ways to reduce retail theft, like providing funds for stores to hire more security. So we as taxpayers need to hire more security guards, I suppose. What are you trying to do to figure out ways that we can really cut into this retail theft, the organized retail theft, Stewart Cousins said, and also help retail establishments to be able to bolster their security and help local police forces to help retailers to be able to abate the crime. So I think, we are all very serious about this. And again, we don't want any workers hurt anywhere. The head of the state Republican Party, Ed Cox, is already highlighting the dispute. In a statement Cox issued, saying the comments illustrate the Democrats' moral rot. Wow. Yeah, it is interesting. We don't want more penalties for shoplifters. Well, really, at this point, I've got to ask the question, what is keeping businesses here or bringing businesses in? I know we've talked about it in addition with Trump's penalty for what the bond was $450 million. Now it's $150 million. But what that will do to business owners as well. Speaking of Governor Hochul, we're going to get to this in just a little bit. Did you see that she was not necessarily what you would say welcomed at the slain police officer Jonathan Diller's wake, where many of the attendees cheering as someone essentially told her to leave. Now, she's saying that's not what happened. There was just a heated confrontation. Okay. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. First, so you know, for tomorrow, New Yorkers are heading to the polls for tomorrow in the low-stakes presidential primary. That's what it says here at USA Today. President Joe Biden and Donald Trump both clinched the nomination in delegate counts 3 weeks ago after blowing past competitors in other states since January. But don't forget, you can still vote. Some are talking about the blank vote against Biden to show their discontent with his stance on Israel, which his stance has weakened so much. But did you see there was actually protests yesterday at Mass, at Easter Mass in New York City? Well, maybe we'll get to that as well. I say maybe. We have plenty of time, but I'm not sure. I feel like we have so much to cover. How many wind up doing so, meaning leaving the blank ballot, after 8 days of early voting and the main event on Tuesday won't be known until official results are posted at least 2 weeks later. The Biden-Trump rematch becomes official when party delegates formally nominate them at conventions this summer. Republicans have their convention in Milwaukee in July. Democrats have theirs in Chicago in August. Now, who else will be on the primary ballot, in case you're curious? I know we brought this up with former Congressman Joe Sempolinski a few interviews back. Joining Biden on the Democrat ballot are ex-candidates Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. The Republican alternatives to Trump are defeated rivals Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, and Ramaswamy. Are there any other things you'll be voting for tomorrow? I've had a lot of people ask me this. No. Only the presidential race is on Tuesday's ballot. New York will hold separate primaries for Congress and state legislature seats on June the 25th. So mark down June the 25th as well, but we'll keep you updated on that. Boy, keep those comments coming in. I love this early morning. I hope you're all getting used to the now 2-hour edition. It was not an April Fool's joke. The 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. We're just getting started. I have to take another break. As I mentioned, if you're just tuning in, we changed the breaks around a little bit as well. So we've got a little more time together in both hours. I love it. And I feel like we're just getting started. I have a feeling there'll be days like today where we'll think maybe 2 hours isn't enough, but we'll stick with 2 hours for now. But thank you for everyone who have sent such nice words in and said such nice things about the program. It is definitely a lot earlier. I feel I'm getting tongue twisted a little bit more than normal. See, but we'll see. Also, I wanted to mention later in the week we're going to be talking with our good friend Joe from the Crystal Chords. If you recall the telethon at Christmas, we had a lot of fun with that, and they sent us so many great songs. So we're going to talk about their upcoming presentation, "I've Got the Music in Me," which is on April the 6th. And it starts at 7 p.m. It's Crystal Chords and Mark Twain Chorus. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to talk with Joe later on in the week. We have some guests throughout the week. Oh, actually, speaking of Joe, a different Joe, Joe Sempolinski, the former congressman. I asked him to be a part of the program this week. He is going to be on the show on Thursday. And I think, the way I understand it, he'll be in studio. So mark your calendar. We'll give him the full hour, the 7 o'clock hour. I'm not going to ask him to do the 6 o'clock hour. The 7 o'clock hour, he's going to be joining us. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. Also, we are working on it. Depends on the budget. I'm working with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano to get updates. And he didn't say this, but my thought is April 4th doesn't look very promising. For the budget. I think there will become not a laziness isn't the right word, but hey, we pushed it back once, we can push it back again, and then we'll just keep doing that so they can get more of their priorities, and we can talk about the meaning of priorities if you want, but more of their priorities through. So we'll talk about that. We'll see if we can get the Assemblyman on as soon as the budget is passed, find out what he thinks. We've got to take another short break. When we come back, we are going to talk about Detective Jonathan Diller and that tragic loss of his life and the wake and funeral over the weekend and late last week. We'll talk about that all when we get back and so much more because we got so much time together. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with the 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. I am your host, Frank Acom. So Governor Hochul saying no one told her to leave the wake of the slain New York Police Department officer. She defended her decision to attend the wake, even though many have suggested she was not welcomed. On Saturday, speaking at the Easter event at the governor's mansion, Hochul said she did not regret attending the wake Friday, despite being confronted by a mourner as she left. Quote, people will do what they're going to do for their own reasons, and I will remain convinced that it was the right thing to do. I would do it again, and that's my job. My job is to be there when people need me, if they need to talk to me, and they'll all need to talk to me. What? And they all needed to talk to me. My job is to listen. If they need to talk to me, and they all needed to talk to me, my job is to listen. So they all needed to talk to you. Okay. That's very strange. It sounds like she wasn't welcomed. It sounds like a little spin. Republican Representative Mike Lawler said the best way to honor his memory and respect the heroism and dedication of the men and women in blue is to enact laws that protect victims, penalize criminals, and support law enforcement. End cashless bail. Now, during her brief attendance at Diller's wake, Hochul said prayers at the casket and was very respectful, she recalled. It's a weird way of putting it. I was very respectful. Anyway. But on her way out, she was accosted by a man identified by the New York Post to be a Diller family member. A video showed the man in a tense conversation with the governor as she made her way to her vehicle following her visit. She didn't say what was discussed. We always ask, would the families like us there? If the families say, no, this is a time for our personal family grieving, we don't want a politician here, we don't go, Hochul said. In this case, we were told the family is welcoming. We always check, and they had said to come, and I went, and no one told me to leave. Okay. Well, this comes off the heels of course, former President Trump attending, and that ties in with this. This is from Miranda Devine at the New York Post. Trick question. 4 presidents went to New York City last week. Only one paid his respects to a fallen NYPD officer. Was it Biden, Obama, Clinton, or Trump? The answer is obvious without even knowing who was there at the Massapequa funeral home. It was Donald Trump, who was welcomed with open arms by the family of Detective Jonathan Diller, the 31-year-old father of one who was gunned down by a recidivist suspect who should have never been on the loose. Yeah, I mean, when you look at his record, it's shocking that he was on the streets. It was Trump who said the right things, who had the empathy to know that at a time like this, you show up, you acknowledge the sacrifice and what it means in the wider world. He's not a professional politician, but he acted on normal human instincts to confront a grieving widow and the 1-year-old son who will never remember his father. He's from Queens, so he knew what was expected by the sea of cops who stood for miles in the rain in a sign of respect for their fallen brother. And he's canny enough as a populist leader to understand that the death of Diller is an epic moment that transcends politics. It defies the betrayal of the people by a callous, corrupt establishment whose faces change but whose lies persist, that law enforcement criminalizes poverty. The truth is that police officers like Diller sacrifice their lives to protect the poor and the powerless, and without them, everything is chaos. Diller's death was the inevitable culmination of the malign criminal justice reform movement that began in the years before the pandemic. The politicians play footsie with the anti-cop movement that have blood on their hands. This is why Governor Hochul was not welcome in Massapequa and received short shrift from Diller's wake. She has done nothing to reverse the law that her predecessor, Andrew Cuomo, angling for the presidency, signed in 2019 to eliminate cash bail for most crimes. The crime rate immediately jumped as violent predators were released to live among us with no consequences for their action. Major crime jumped by 22.5% in February of 2020. The COVID lockdown masked the damage, and then Bill de Blasio, New York's worst ever mayor, compounded the problem when he ordered the release of prison inmates on compassionate grounds. Compassion for criminals, not for their future victims. Now we are all living on Rikers Island. What a great point from Miranda Devine. I really like Miranda Devine's, the way she can send a message. But she's exactly right, and I mentioned it so often. The tragedy in all of it is the victims that didn't need to be victims. When these people are let out before the ink is even dry on the paperwork and they commit another crime, that's a victim that did not have to be a victim. The same with this instance. It's Diller's family should not be without him today. If you look at the suspect's criminal record, the fact that he was on the street is actually shocking if we didn't know how weak Albany was on crime. And I'll tie in one more thing with that. No, two more things. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'm doing good. Stephanie Diller asked a question during the wake. That's, of course, Jonathan Diller's wife. How many more police officers and how many more families need to make the ultimate sacrifice before we start protecting them? Now, I mentioned this. The New York Times did not find words like that fit to print. Yes, listen to this. Nor any of the lines that preceded it. It's been 2 years and 2 months since Detective Riviera and Detective Mora made the ultimate sacrifice, just like my husband, Jonathan Diller. Dominique Riviera stood before all the elected officials present today pleading for change. That change never came. And now my son will grow up without his father, and I will grow old without my husband. And his parents have to say goodbye to their children. Her words made the front page of the New York Post and even the hyper-left Daily News. Yet the Times, the New York Times, stuck its report back on page A21 without even a, quote, tracer on the front page. The one local story that got that privilege, got the front page, was about New City trash containers. Can you believe that? From the New York Times. The article quoted the widow's eulogy, but not her most newsworthy appeal. Not even in the online version, with no space limit at all, though it ran 1,100 plus words. But get this, the Times did find room for the ever-important, quote, Republicans pounce angle. Nearly 300 words on how some people, particularly Republicans, have seized on the killing as emblematic of what they consider the lax laws and public safety policies promoted by New York Democrats. When the article explained major crime reports in the city are down 2% this year over last. So do you see, this happens so often. It's the same with the economy, what we talk about. Never mind what you're experiencing, never mind what you're seeing, never mind what you're feeling. Believe our statistics. Again, one of those, quote, some people was the widow in her eulogy, citing the similar and still unanswered plea of another cop widow 2 years before, a fact the New York Times didn't think important enough to share with its readers. In short, the Gray Lady just offered a master class in how to offer disingenuous spin in the guise of honest reporting. Its true motto has become only the news that supports our agenda, and that's from the New York Post editorial board. Just disturbing. Now, we do have to take another short break, and then we are going to talk about Transgender Day of Visibility. Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Governor Hochul, many others, yesterday wishing everybody a happy, if you will, Transgender Day of Visibility. We'll talk about that. We also have a few things about immigration. We still have a couple stories we'll just go through quick, because did you see Harvard? I hope we get to this. Did you see Harvard struggling with admissions? I wonder why. Because of that anti-Semitism that we learned about. We are going to talk about that as well. We are just getting started. This is the 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. It's hard to believe. Just kind of waking up along with you. And we're just getting started. Not even halfway through. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with the all-new 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I think it's going smooth so far. I hope everybody set their alarm. I'm sure there's some people that are not aware, and they'll join us and see how much they'll have missed if they're just tuning in at 7 o'clock, because we have so much to talk about. We are going to talk a little bit about Mike Johnson. What do you think? Marjorie Taylor Greene says that she's got a few more allies in the bid to oust Mike Johnson. I've got to say, I don't understand the logic here. I don't understand the push to boot him out. I think it's not a smart political move, but you can weigh in. If you're new to the program, if maybe you're up at 6 and you said, I've never watched this before, see that number on the bottom of your screen. Feel free at any time to comment on the issues that we are talking about, or any issue. Question, comments, concerns, criticisms. That's the number right there on the bottom of your screen. One last update about Jonathan Diller and the wake. I just thought this was nice. The landmark Queens Deli is raising funds for the family of Jonathan Diller by peddling what they call the NYPD sandwich in his honor. Mario's Meat Market and Gourmet Deli in Middle Village said each sale of the hoagie, which is a chicken cutlet, mozzarella, sun-dried tomatoes, and arugula, drizzled with balsamic glaze, will mean a $5 donation for widow Stephanie Diller and the couple's 1-year-old son. Officer Diller's murder gave me the chills, said the deli owner. It hit me. I have 2 young boys. I couldn't imagine not being at their hockey game. The deli is set to announce the sandwich Monday at 10 a.m. I was at Officer Diller's funeral. I was in tears. Joe is doing a good thing here. He cares about the neighborhood. He appreciates the cops and the sacrifice families make. People want to do something to help the family. That's the kind of district I have. And this is Councilman Robert Holden. We support the police. Okay. Well, we could talk about the issues with supporting the police in New York State. I don't believe that the support is actually there. There's a lot of bluster. There's a lot of PR and a lot of spin, but not a lot of substance. And that's why you see those politicians in Albany fighting about stricter penalties for shoplifting. In this instance, we're talking about the loss of a police officer. But think of how many, again, going back to how many victims did not need to be victims. Well, when it comes to retail theft, all these retail workers and what they have to put up with. I mentioned this quickly at the beginning of the show. Serial protesters disrupted Easter Mass at St. Patrick's with a Free Palestine chant before cops hauled them away. I don't quite understand this. And this happens on a semi-regular basis where a protester, I think, ultimately hurts their cause by where they choose to protest. For example, when you had, what was the movement? I can't remember what the issue was because this has happened so often. I think it's happened when it comes to Israel as well. But shutting down bridges and roadways by holding sit-ins and people getting so outraged because you just want to get home from work or you want to go to work and you don't want to be late. So I don't think those type of things help your cause. And this is another example. A trio of attention-seeking protesters, one of whom previously glued his feet to the stands at the U.S. Open as part of a climate change stunt, were cuffed and hauled out of St. Patrick's Cathedral, after disrupting Easter Mass with shouts of Free Palestine. So this, talk about a career protester. This person glued their feet to the stands at the U.S. Open, and that was not because of Palestine. That was because of a climate change issue. Police were called to the iconic Midtown Cathedral for complaints about a disorderly group just before 9 p.m. The protesters were quickly taken out of the service. Matthew Menzies, 31, John Rosendahl, 63, and Gregory Swendek, 35, was taken into custody and charged with disruption of religious services. I didn't know that was a charge. While being escorted out, one yelled, Free Palestine. Okay. Not the right time or the right place, but obviously not a huge respect for Easter, I guess, by these protesters or by what we're seeing from politicians as they celebrated Transgender Day of Visibility. But back to this real quickly before we take our next break. I don't understand, I guess, what you hope to accomplish by disrupting an Easter Mass service at St. Patrick's. Do you think the screaming Free Palestine, there'll be people in that Mass that will say, wow. Sorry about the unscheduled break there. I forgot we moved things around and I went to click on the wave button and it had been moved and I took a break. But that's okay. We were around break time anyway. So welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Foxy, all new 2-hour edition as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. So did you see the report? We were talking about the protesters at Mass. I just don't think it helps their cause. But I would love to. Oh, they also had a sign that said silence equals death. So I guess shouting at Easter Mass means that you're not silent. And you're not, in their mind, complicit when it comes to death. All right, but so anyway, as the majority of America is prepared to celebrate Easter, President Biden issued a proclamation honoring Transgender Day of Visibility. This has been making the rounds this morning. The proclamation parroted the trans activists' dark creed, claiming bullying and harassment and discrimination of people who embrace a transgender identity are causing a mental health crisis, suicide, and epidemic of violence. The president's choice to celebrate trans activists' suicide-soaked false narrative rather than the joy and promise of Easter was cruel to both Christians and the emotionally vulnerable people captivated by trans ideology. This coming from Ginny Gentles at the New York Post. I'm not going to go through the whole history of that day. After the shock of this year's Transgender Day of Visibility Easter proclamation dies down, Americans must tap into a similar energy to end the Biden administration's relentless and radical policy agenda. Wow. Okay, I just received this comment. Wow. You know what? I don't know. Is that true? I'm sorry. I should read it to you. But I did not hear that. That's amazing. Regarding, I don't know if you saw the story. I'll give you a little bit. So I can't verify this, but I'm being told that the woman that allegedly set fire to Fast Track over here in Corning, maybe that's technically Riverside, you may have saw it on the news, threatened to kill onlookers, was threatening, I believe, with a knife, and threatened police officers, was released on her own recognizance. Is that right? Wow. Please, anybody want to weigh in on that? Thank you for the comment, by the way. Okay. Every apologist will tell you it's just coincidence that Transgender Day of Visibility, which has been March 31st since its creation in 2009, this year falls the same day as Easter, the holiest day for Christians, which moves around. So what? The activists who set the date should have considered the chances, and the Biden White House should have checked the 2024 calendar before it committed to recognizing the Trans Day back in 2021. And Governor Hochul certainly should have thought things through before ordering One World Trade Center and other landmarks lit light pink, white, and blue to honor the day. In your face is in your face, whatever the excuses. Christians aren't especially anti-trans. If anything, it's trans activists who tend to be anti-Christian or perhaps anti-Catholic. I thought that was a really good line. Let me read that again. Oh, okay, got to be careful here. I can't push the wrong button. We got 2 waves added here. Okay. No, Christians aren't especially anti-trans. If anything, it's trans activists who tend to be anti-Christian. But hackles certainly get raised when an elite beloved group somehow gets to the head of the line, jumping over 2 millennia old high holiday, especially when the left's new boogeyman is Christian nationalism. And lefty activists thought it was a great idea to disrupt Easter Vigil services Saturday night at St. Patrick's in the name of Palestine. As it happens, but the left's cause all blur together these days. They're united centrally in screeching that everything normal is evil, if only because it's not on board with something insane like open borders, life-changing surgery, or confused teens or Israelis' obligation to let themselves be slaughtered by terrorists. We're not sure if President Biden or the staff who plainly run the White House are just trolling us at this point, or if they've truly lost touch with what most Americans of all creeds, races, and gender identification believe, with regular folks, quote, lived experiences, if you must. But the message is that the Democrat Party elites care only about these extremes, with no thought at all for actual mainstream America. It's sad, said the New York Post editorial board. All right, how am I doing on time? I'm doing good on time. Can you believe the first hour is almost through? Yes. It is the 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking, as you're aware, if you're watching in the 6 o'clock hour. We're going to continue talking about the Trans Day of Visibility. Thank you to everybody reaching out, congratulating us. I think it's going pretty smooth. I mean, it's really no different than regular Frankly Speaking, just a little bit earlier. The alarm went off a little bit earlier, so maybe getting the cobwebs out these first couple mornings in the 6 o'clock hour. Okay. Released on bail reform. Because of bail reform, she was released. That is unbelievable. But again, never mind what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you're feeling. It's all in your head, according to these politicians in Albany. Again, maybe you can help explain this to me. I don't understand. Just from a purely political standpoint, from a PR political standpoint, why there aren't more politicians in Albany pushing for changes to bail reform and these soft on crime laws so that they look like the heroes of that cause. I know Governor Hochul kind of misleads you and gives press conferences suggesting that she's tough on crime when we know the fact is that she's not. So maybe they're hoping they can get they could get away with it. We got a visitor. Hold on. BJ from Brown Cigar Store stopping by. Bring me breakfast. We'll take our next break. Stay with us. Getting breakfast delivered to me in celebration of our 2 hours on Frankly Speaking. BJ from Brown Cigar Store, kind enough to drop off some leftovers from Easter dinner yesterday. I appreciate that. I did not expect it, as you can tell by my shocked look as someone came to the window. But thank you to everybody who joined us. Yes, we are starting 2 hours. It was not an April Fool's joke. This is an ongoing thing as we near November. Obviously, there's so much to talk about, and the shows have just been going so quickly that it only made sense to go to 2 hours. And I'm proud that after a little over a year, we are now 2 hours. And I think with all the comments I've been receiving, I think this is welcomed. So thank you. Going back to this, not even Easter could be spared from the culture wars, said Ryan King. This year, the holiest Christian holiday on the calendar, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ, coincides with Transgender Day of Visibility, which has taken place on March 31st every year since 2009. In keeping with years past, President Biden, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, and a slew of other top Democrat politicians celebrated both Easter and Transgender Day of Visibility, stoking ire from Christian conservatives who view supporting transgender people as antithetical to their religion. I don't know if that's the right way to word that, but let's just accept what Ryan King says at face value here. On Saturday, Hochul followed suit after Biden had announced that major Empire State landmarks, including One World Trade Center, Bridge, Niagara Falls, elsewhere, would be lit up pink, white, and light blue. Today, we celebrate Transgender Day of Visibility by acknowledging the contributions that members of the transgender community have made in New York State and across the country. I am proud of the strength transgender New Yorkers display every day. I want to make one thing clear. You are always welcome in New York. You are loved. Well, that's nice because I guess it was her predecessor who said the conservatives weren't welcome in New York. But okay. Biden's statement is what kicked off the, I guess you could say, anger. I don't know if anger is the right word. It almost seems more of a confusion. And sparked festering outrage among Christians and conservatives over the Easter weekend. If you recall, former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy said Joe Biden declaring the most holy day for Christians as Transgender Visibility Day is a slap in the face to every American, whatever their faith. We're in the middle of a war in this country, he said. Even Mike Johnson, who we mentioned, and there's that big push to oust Speaker Johnson. He said, we call on Joe Biden's failing campaign and White House to issue an apology to the millions of Catholics and Christians across America who believe tomorrow is for one celebration only, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm absolutely... Oh, that was... Okay, I thought that was Mike Johnson. I'm sorry. That was Trump National Press Secretary. I'm absolutely disgusted that Joe Biden has declared the most holy of holy days, a self-proclaimed devout Catholic, as Transgender Day of Visibility, said Caitlyn Jenner, of all people, a prominent transgender conservative. The only thing you should be declaring on this day is he is risen. The White House vehemently pushed back and denounced the criticism, claiming it was hateful. White House spokesman Andrew Bates said, as a Christian who celebrates Easter with family, President Biden stands for bringing people together and upholding the dignity and freedoms of every American. Sadly, it's unsurprising politicians are seeking to divide and weaken our country with cruel, hateful, and dishonest rhetoric. President Biden will never abuse his faith for political purposes or for profit. Enough of that. So we have a couple other things on that. Can you believe that our first hour is through almost? I'm starting to think 2 hours is enough. Look at all these nice comments. Frank, congratulations on the debut of your new 1 hour and 20-minute show. It was no mistake for the Democrats to celebrate Trans Day on Easter. The Democrat message has been very clear. The people need to count on the government for help, not the church. Vote for us. We're the ones that give you free stuff. Good point, Ken. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's 2 hours. It's 2 hours. We got a couple breaks here and there, but not we cut back on breaks. So it is 2 hours worth of Frankly Speaking. We got a lot of comments coming in. people taking to the 6 o'clock hour? Do you like it? What do you think? Let me know as we get ready to take our first, well, not first break, but end our first hour. I'm really having fun with it. Just trying to get, your bearings a little bit to go back. Because if you recall, if you're new to the program, I was on radio for many years, and that was 3 hours. So this isn't that difficult, but it's kind of like getting your sea legs back, maybe is the way to put it, and trying to figure out how much I need to print out and how many things we need to talk about. And there are so many things. Do you think Mike Johnson will be ousted? Now, last week we had the story that this could actually backfire for Marjorie Taylor Greene and that wing, if you will, of the Republican Party, because he may have to side with Democrats to get things done that normally he would not want to do. So we could talk about that. I do have a few more things about the Trans Day of Visibility. I don't want to focus too much on that. We could talk more about public safety if you'd like. I know that's a major issue, and we talked about it so often with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano and Chris Friend and Tom O'Mara, and really just about every guest we have on here. Obviously, Allard is a major issue that the governor and those in Albany do not seem to be taking seriously. As I reported earlier, the budget hang-up is because they don't want stricter penalties for shoplifters. When I say those, it's the Democrats in Albany. Governor Hochul does want stricter penalties for shoplifters, but Hasty and others saying no, we don't want to go that direction. Okay, we've got some other comments coming in. Here's one. It's a blatant in your face showing us their hatred towards Christians, and it's disgusting. Oh, wow. Your thoughts on that? Keep the comments coming in. You see the number on the bottom of your screen. How am I doing? All right, I got to look at my time here. Well, let's sit back. I have just a second here. I have about 30 seconds before we wrap up this hour. I really enjoy having another hour to be with you, so thank you so much for maybe setting your alarm a little earlier or getting around a little earlier. And also, I got to thank everybody who's come up to me on the street or out in public and just saying that they're excited for the extra hour. I'm excited as well. I think I'll normally be a little more awake, just trying to get used to that. But the first hour is through. 1 hour left together here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV Big Fox. We'll continue broadcasting live from the Hesselson's studio. So stay with us. We'll be right back with hour number 2. Got a little extra view of Marcus. We had to go run and get water. I didn't have enough time. Welcome back. Yes, welcome back. If you're just joining us, you missed a lot in that first hour and the all-new 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. It was not an April Fool's joke this whole time. It is actually happening. 2 hours of Frankly Speaking, and thank you so much for joining us. All right, we got waves coming in. Oh, I forgot to read that comment. We'll get to your comments in just a little bit. I apologize over that. Like I said, I was running to get water. All right, so we were talking about the politicians facing a backlash, if you will, over the Trans Day of Visibility on Easter. White House spokesman Andrew Bates released a statement saying those critical of Biden's inclusiveness message are trying to further divide the country. So if you thought that this was maybe inappropriate on Easter Sunday, you are further dividing the country. As a Christian who celebrates Easter with family, President Biden stands for bringing people together and upholding the dignity and freedoms of every American. Sadly, it's unsurprising politicians are seeking to divide and weaken our country with cruel, hateful, and dishonest rhetoric. President Biden will never abuse his faith for political purposes or for profit. What are your thoughts on this? We've had a lot of comments. House Speaker Mike Johnson accused the Biden administration of betraying what Easter Sunday stands for after the White House also banned religious egg designs on its Easter art event, which, like the annual Easter egg roll, is part of the White House Easter tradition. Quote, the Biden White House has betrayed the central tenet of Easter, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, Johnson said. Banning sacred truth and tradition while at the same time proclaiming Easter Sunday as Transgender Day is outrageous and abhorrent. The American people are taking note. Franklin Graham, of course, Billy Graham's son, wrote that Biden and his administration have, quote, little respect for God. This once again shows how little respect President Biden and his administration have for God. On the most significant day of the Christian calendar, when the church around the world celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who died and shed his blood for the sins of mankind, the Biden administration uses the opportunity to flaunt sin, to glorify sin, and to celebrate sin. So weigh in on that. I know that was a big issue. Nancy Pelosi could not stand by. She had to not only talk about Trans Visibility Day on Easter Sunday, but also marked Cesar Chavez Day. Pelosi issued a tweet honoring the late farm worker, union organizer, and civil rights leader on Sunday, shortly after posting a message of Easter greeting to Christians nationwide. Now, there was some damage control. Biden did wish Christians a happy Easter after embracing Transgender Day of Visibility, saying, "Jill and I send our warmest wishes to Christians around the world celebrating Easter Sunday. Easter reminds us of the power of hope and the promise of Christ's resurrection. As we gather with loved ones, we remember Jesus' sacrifice. We pray for one another and cherish the blessing of the dawn of new possibilities. And with wars and conflict taking a toll on innocent lives around the world, we renew our commitment to work for peace, security, and dignity for all people. From our family to yours, happy Easter, and may God bless." Okay. So that's a little, maybe you could call damage control after announcing Transgender Day of Visibility. AOC, I guess, got blasted over the weekend for suggesting that Christ was a Palestinian. Well, coming from the New York Post, a noted biblical scholar is blasting left-leaning politicians for floating the idea that Jesus Christ was a Palestinian. Isn't it weird how so many, I don't know if you want to call them activists, but these far-left Democrats use holidays like Easter, use special occasions to protest. As we mentioned, the Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City being disrupted by people yelling "Free Palestine." Is that the right time and the right place? Same with this comment, trying to use Easter Sunday, the holiest day in the Christian year, to push a political agenda. This Easter, said Boston University scholar Paula Fredrickson, who wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, said, "This Easter, let's not try to pretend Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. Calling Jesus a Palestinian or even a Palestinian Jew is all about modern politics. Besides being historically false, the claim is inflammatory. For 2 millennia, Jews have been blamed for Jesus' execution by the Romans. Casting him as a Palestinian just stokes the fires of hate. It is murder, an act of cultural and political appropriation." What? It is murder, an act of cultural and political appropriation, and a clever rhetorical move. It rips Jesus out of his Jewish context. Now, several liberals on Capitol Hill, including the several squad members, drew heat over Christmas by proclaiming that Jesus lived in an occupied country, drawing a parallel with present-day Palestinians who find themselves in conflict with Israel. AOC said in a post at the time, in the story of Christmas, Christ was born in modern-day Palestine under the threat of a government engaged in massacre of innocents. He was part of a targeted population being indiscriminately killed to protect an unjust leader's power. Anyway, you get the idea. I guess it shows the true colors of those on the left to use a very important day for Christians to be just so political. Speaking of Israel, Bowman, Jamal Bowman, the representative who pulled the fire alarm, he's running for re-election in what sounds like it could be a close race. He called Netanyahu a maniac and demands removal from office. Well, I'd say, who is Representative Bowman to demand those things? But that is very typical of what we see from politicians and maybe what you'd call liberal activists, which are these list of demands. And let's face it, Chuck Schumer weighed in on this, demanding the same essential thing: to disrupt or get involved with another country's politics. I just, again, moving along here. Congressman Jamal Bowman had choice words for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling him a maniac who needs to be removed from office. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu, you just have to laugh over this. I mean, who is Representative Bowman to Benjamin Netanyahu? But the Progressive Democrat initially discussed the Biden administration transferring 1,800 MK-84, 2,000-pound bombs, et cetera, a lot of other stuff, without notifying lawmakers. An arms package that was reported exclusively by the Washington Post. Bowman said that Congress should have absolutely been notified. The majority of Gaza has already been destroyed through acts of collective punishment by this maniac, Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm 100% with Senator Schumer. He needs to be removed, meaning Netanyahu, not Schumer. He is a blockade to a pathway to peace, and we need a ceasefire right now. That's what we should be focused on, humanitarian aid, not weapons. Well, again, this is what we're seeing now. From the Democrat Party. So none of this really comes as a surprise. They're just not hiding anymore. And you can tie that in with the anti-Semitism we're seeing on college campuses. And I know I teased that I would bring this up. Harvard is learning an ancient lesson. You reap what you sow. On Thursday, it was announced the college had an application drop of 5%. Yes, applications dropped 5% from last year. This after early admission applications fell 17% to a 4-year low. And it's all a natural, rational response to the series of scandals that exposed Harvard's leaders as prioritizing woke ideology over excellence, free speech, and student safety. The first blows, a wave of campus anti-Semitism after the October 7th terror attack on Israel, followed by then-President Claudine Gay's disastrous House hearing in December, where she defended hateful intimidation and anti-Israel protests as free speech. Then came the flood of allegations of plagiarism, first against Gay, which, by the way, the Harvard Corps tried to cover up. Then against Harvard's chief DEI officer, which we may talk about that in just a moment, Sherry Ann Charleston. Then Shirley Green, another school DEI officer. Jewish students plainly can't rely on Harvard's leadership to protect them from anti-Semites on campus. And how can any student trust a school so eager to push diversity, equity, and inclusion that it holds DEI hires to laughably low standards? The students that top schools hope to attract, ambitious, practical, and academically oriented, are clearly drawing the obvious conclusion. Harvard's brand isn't worth the sky-high costs and will only get worse until its leaders change course. Let all of U.S. higher education be warned. If you don't kick the radicals off campus and off the school's board, shut down the DEI offices, and focus on offering an education worth the cost of tuition, you could be next. Yes, they feel that they are an untouchable. There is a piece, I don't know if I have time to get to it, about DEI. Now they are considering some to downplay what DEI is doing on college campuses and quote-unquote the real world. If you bring up DEI, it's now considered a racial term. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you don't know what DEI stands for. But if you say DEI, it could now be considered a racial slur. Maybe we'll get to that as well. Keep those comments coming in. I haven't looked in just a second. We'll try to read a few of them. Wow, look at all these. Look at all the waves. Thank you, everyone. It is now the 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. Just got to add all of these up. Anyway, let's take a break because I have a lot of comments to get to. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back after this. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio in hour 2 of Frankly Speaking. Yes, if you did not join us this morning, we'll do so tomorrow then, because we start at 6 a.m. now. So just quickly, and I'd love to hear your thought on this. Black Americans say that DEI has been co-opted as a racial slur after conservatives sought to blame diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for the deadly Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. Okay. DEI programs have become a frequent target of right-wing activists in recent years, and Republican lawmakers are backing dozens of bills targeting DEI initiatives at universities and other public institutions. Some sought to cast Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott, who is black, as a diversity hire, despite him being elected to office with more than 70% of the vote in a city with a predominantly black population. He was dubbed Baltimore's DEI mayor in one post on X by a verified account with almost 300,000 followers. It has amassed more than 25 million views. All right. That's one way to silence people, to not mention DEI initiatives. Okay, I'm going to get away from that because we have so much to get to. And there's absolutely no way we shouldn't be able to get to all of it with 2 hours together on the show. I do want to remind you, though, quickly before we move along, before we go to another topic, and we do have to take another short break here. If you didn't join us in the 6 o'clock hour, the breaks have changed a little bit. We have less breaks, so we have even more time together on that level. Yeah, it's pretty amazing here. It's an exciting new era of Frankly Speaking. But as I said, I wanted to mention, because we really like these guys and we want to support them, it is the upcoming, I'm not going to have it here. It is the upcoming library book sale that I cannot currently find. There we go. The book sale, Friends of the Southeast Steuben County Library book sale, is coming up, so mark your calendars. I know this is something many of us look forward to all year, or half the year, because there's 2 in a year. But I wanted to mention that to you before we take a break. We've got immigration issues to get to. Do you think, as I keep that up for just a few more seconds, do you think Mike Johnson is in trouble? Now, I know Marjorie Taylor Greene has been pushing for his ouster, but not as strong, if you will, as in the past. But I read today that she does have some new allies in that fight against Johnson. Many saying it could backfire on her as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We're going to have, let's see, immigration, Mike Johnson. We talked earlier, if you didn't join us in the 6 o'clock hour, about the difference, kind of the optics, if you will, of Trump and his visit to the wake as compared to the lavish fundraiser of Biden, Obama, and Clinton. You know the optics weren't good when the media was covering up all weekend how bad the optics were, saying things like, well, this fundraiser was planned well in advance. He would have no way. But remember, he had not said at that point the officer's name. I think he called Mayor Adams, wasn't it, that we learned on Friday, to offer his condolences to the family, to have Adams relay it. So I think the media saw how bad the optics were on that for the president and tried to do as much as they could to cover up for him. But it goes to show, and we had that great piece from the New York Post on Friday, kind of the elitist attitude. And remember, at a time when they keep telling us that they're fighting for the little person and that it's the forgotten men and women that they're fighting for, then they have a $25 million fundraiser. And I would have to say former President Trump was very good at capitalizing on that, for lack of a better term, and exposing those differences as someone who does talk frequently, meaning Trump, about the forgotten men and women, and that has resonated so much, and that's why the media does not want to show the rallies any longer. We had a lot of comments coming in. More nonsense. If DEI is considered a racist slur, then DEI and any related affiliation should be immediately shut down, in my opinion. Boy, there's a lot when we look at what's happening on college campuses. A lot comes from those initiatives. Frank, I finally met a liberal that didn't shout their opinion. April Fools. Thank you for that comment. We're going to talk about immigration when we come back. We've got a lot to cover. Thank you again for joining us for all 2 hours. It's a regular thing now. I don't have to keep bringing it up. It's every day. We're going to be on for 2 hours, and I really appreciate you being a part of as much as you possibly can. If you are, for some reason, new to the show, maybe you saw the ad, the number on the bottom of the screen is the best way to reach me. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms, please, at any point, and we try to read as many comments as we have an opportunity to, but you see the number. Look at that, 11 waves already this morning. I like this 2-hour time block of Frankly Speaking as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Let's take another short break, and then we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking after this. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. There's our beautiful view of Market Street. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Ake. I'm looking at this comment. Do people realize if Johnson loses Speaker of the House and Republicans also lose the majority, if the election in November, the highest vote getter doesn't make it to 270 electoral votes, then the House elects who wins the presidency? That's a very good point. Yes, they say that listen to this. We got another virtual wave. Love the new extended version of Frankly Speaking. Well, thank you very much. I love being on. I think Got to do a better job of time management in the morning. Get back into the flow of the 6 o'clock hour. But I'd say it's going pretty smooth. I hope you agree. Speaking of, what was I going to do with that? That comment about Johnson. Let's skip right to there. So, why would any Republican want to be House Speaker? That is a great question from Daniel McCarthy at the New York Post. Mel Brooks said it's good to be the king, but is it good to be Speaker of the House of Representatives? You're the most powerful legislator in Congress, if not the world, and just 2 heartbeats away from being president. If you're Republican, though, your task is thankless and possibly hopeless. It looks that way for Speaker Mike Johnson right now. With the barest Republican majority in the House, another resignation or sudden death could throw control of the chamber to the Democrats and hand the speakership to Hakeem Jeffries well ahead of November's election. Even if the GOP suffers no attrition before Election Day, Johnson could lose his head at any time to another revolt within the party's ranks. House Republicans were unruly enough when they enjoyed a majority of almost 60 seats under Boehner nearly a decade ago. Donald Trump wasn't a factor back then, and Barack Obama gave Republicans an opponent to unite against, yet they still couldn't cohere as a party. Boehner finally gave up and resigned the speakership in 2015, letting Paul Ryan take over. The Wisconsin congressman was until then a rising star in the GOP, but after 3 years as Speaker, he was done with politics and bowed out of Congress altogether. Well, I think there's a little bit more there. But Kevin McCarthy knew what he was getting into when he grabbed the gavel after Republicans most recently took back the House, but he overestimated his odds of survival. Rebellious backbenchers overthrew him 9 months into his speakership. Then he too quit Congress. How long will Johnson last? And who would want to succeed him? I think that's a great question. I mean, I do got to believe that Steve Scalise has wanted that, and it didn't go well for him when they put him up for a vote, but I honestly thought he would get it. I was kind of shocked by that. Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise vied to replace McCarthy, but the same instability that prevented either of them from securing the votes needed would have poisoned the prize even if one of them had been able to win it. Johnson was nobody's first choice for Speaker, and that's partly why he got the job. He wasn't loved enough to be hated either. But now Johnson gets the blame when the House passes continuing resolutions that keep the government open and the cost of failing to use the threat of a shutdown to get concessions from Biden. I think it's a fair question that he's asking. Why would you want to be Speaker? I mean, really, you could be ousted at any moment. And as I said, they are claiming that Marjorie Taylor Greene has a few more allies in this fight. The solution to the otherwise problem every Republican speaker now faces begins with putting more responsibility back on committees. The speaker is too much of a monarch. Congress can only operate on the Republican principle of divided power and mediating institutions. Committees are the institutions that mediate between the speaker and leadership in general and members. It's good to be the king if you're Mel Brooks. If you're the Speaker of the House, take heed of Shakespeare. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. I think Mike Johnson's been doing a pretty good job overall. I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised. I think we're at that point where any Republican as Speaker is going to have these threats of ouster being thrown around. CNN says, days after his speakership was put on notice by far-right member Mike Johnson, firebrand GOP Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, the architect of the last effort to remove a speaker. So I worded that strange. But Mike Johnson strategized what he would do. I'm sorry, leave it to CNN to have a sentence like that. Matt Gaetz is looking to remove him as well. I gave the speaker some unsolicited advice. Who is Matt Gaetz to think he wields this kind of power? But anyway, that we've got to get into fighting posture. And I was very pleased with how the speaker received that advice, Gaetz said. The speaker wants to put wins on the board for House Republicans, and we better start doing that. I'm glad the speaker hasn't rolled over to the $95 billion Ukraine supplement that the Senate passed. I think he's forging a better path on that issue as we speak. There's a lot of people in Washington right now that have a power that I'm not sure is justified. Representative Bob Good of Virginia, who chairs the right-wing group and one of 8 Republicans who voted to oust McCarthy, told CNN nobody cares what Marjorie Taylor Greene says or thinks, and she's a one-man show. She's grandstanding and she wants attention. Has a frosty relationship with Greene, who is backing his primary opponent. Nobody cares about Marjorie Taylor Greene, says or thinks, Good said, and she's a one-man show. Asked if Johnson should be voted out, Good said, I don't have a comment on that, and I think that is a comment in and of itself. Other hardliners are opposed to kicking out Johnson. I do not think now is the time to put America through another battle to select a new person as Speaker of the House, said Ralph Norman. Yeah, I mean, at this time, we're almost at November. I know it's only April 1st, first day of 2 hours of Frankly Speaking, but that's going to come in no time. Let's focus on what's important, which is November. GOP Representative Andrew Clyde of Georgia said he didn't believe Greene's threat against Johnson's job was serious, but warned, I think we need to focus on securing our border before we focus on securing some other country's border. Interesting. Greene is pressing ahead both on social media and behind the scenes to keep up the pressure. She told CNN soon after she announced her plans that there are quite a few lawmakers supporting her effort, but would not specify exactly how many or who is backing her. I have a number that have committed, but there's also a large number that have already expressed to me a huge sigh of relief. My motion to vacate is a force for change, and Republicans better take it seriously and spend the necessary time planning and coming together for new leadership. There you are. That was our quick view. I know I've been talking about it all morning about the potential of Mike Johnson. Don't you think we'd want to, let's wait till November. I mean, this could, a lot of people have said it. Hakeem Jeffries, at the end of the day, could be Speaker of the House, even with Republicans having this majority. Not a huge majority, but having a majority. I mean, we're really screwing up something if that becomes the conversation that we're having. All right. How about this? Great point by Ken. Isn't it interesting that we breathlessly hear that Israel must stop the military operations in Gaza, but we never hear that Hamas should stop the fighting, which they started, and exit Gaza? That's a great point. This war could have been over, as they talk about stop the war. This war could have been over day one or never happened if it weren't for Hamas. Hamas is the one deciding this war continues. So they can blame Israel as much as they want. We saw it over the weekend by AOC and others. They can blame Israel all they want, but they never go back, and none of the articles ever say that this is Hamas's fault. And that's why I like Benjamin Netanyahu's tough stance, which is we've got to win this thing. We've got to wipe out Hamas. Never mind what public opinion polls in America say, what Representative Bowman has to say about Netanyahu's leadership. He knows what's right for his people. So I think that's a very good point from Ken. We never hear that Hamas should stop the fighting, which they started, and that they should exit Gaza. Yes, you never do hear that from the media, who has an agenda on this as well, like we see from so many politicians. We got to take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, the 2-hour edition, our first time on the air for 2 hours. I really appreciate you joining us, and we'll be right back. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. The now 2-hour-long edition of Frankly Speaking. And I've got to say, I think it's going smooth. Comment from a viewer. In my opinion, Republicans need no more distractions at this point in time. It's absolutely too risky. I couldn't agree more. Let's just keep our head down. Let's try to win this in November. Republicans always try to do something to muddy the water, if you will, and make things more complicated. I don't think if you kick out Johnson or somehow Hakeem Jeffrey gets in there, I don't see how that's viewed as a positive thing as we near November. And I see a lot of maybe punishment coming from voters if that's the case. And I think Mike Johnson, all things considered, has been doing a very good job. Is everything perfect? No. But we have Republicans have a very, very small, especially it seems like every day it's getting smaller, majority. Do you agree with this from CNN? Stephen Collinson. By the way, I forgot to print it out. And I know I talk about Dino Badala praising Saturday Night Live so often. And I think sometimes people might say, well, you're over-exaggerating. Well, yeah, he said Saturdays was historic, using language like that. Anyway, I'm sorry, getting on a tangent there. Trump's inflammatory rhetoric has been effective for him so far, but poses real danger, said Stephen Collinson at CNN. An undercurrent of implied violence has always been an essential ingredient of Donald Trump's strongman persona. As the ex-president's first trial and the general election approach, he is turning up the heat, creating a tense political atmosphere. And they talk about some video he shared. And in some ways, this is classic behavior from Trump and follows multiple previous social media threats to judges, political opponents, and anyone who angers him. But the context of looming trials and the election is important. No other presumptive Republican nominee or former president has acted in anything like this fashion. While Trump, who has pleaded not guilty in all matters against him, is subject to various partial gag orders in several cases, it's hard to believe any other defendant would be allowed to continually threaten and demean judges and their courts in such a manner. Okay. Anyway, I just like reading those every once in a while. Get you started this morning. Get you worked up here at 7:30 on your Monday morning. I hope everybody had a nice Easter, by the way. I know we've been talking about it throughout the morning, but the transgender activists, the president commenting on that. Congressman Clyburn said it best yesterday. This is from a viewer. If Jeffries told him to vote to either keep or oust Johnson, he would do as he is told. That is a Democrat's strength. They may not be for the majority of the American people, but they will stick together because they know they don't. If they don't, they won't be there. The Republicans' greatest weakness is they don't stick together because they know that if they do, they won't get legacy media airtime. I could not agree more, Ken. Thank you for that comment. Yes, that's why you so often have the quote-unquote mavericks, right? John McCain considered a maverick because he would badmouth Republicans, and then he would get media attention. Same with Liz Cheney. I mean, they wrote glowing articles about her. Now, go back and look at the archives and see how they treated her father. And look at Mitt Romney releasing op-eds on CNN and places like that and coming out and bashing Trump on those outlets after they called him such horrible, despicable things, suggesting that he wanted one of his employees to die of cancer. You remember that? Binder full of women, all that. And then he still goes to that same place to offer his attacks on Trump. But I agree with you, Ken. I think Democrats are amazing at sticking together. You never have a scenario. Could you ever imagine a scenario like what we had with McCarthy? No. Think about Nancy Pelosi, who's been in there forever. They rally around the troops. No matter how many times they lost elections, whenever it was Nancy Pelosi's turn, whenever they had the majority, she was going to be there. They don't ever stab each other in the back like we do as Republicans. Republicans are very good at throwing each other under the bus. Historically, it's the unfortunate reality. And like Ken said here in his message, Democrats, that's their strength. They may not be for the majority of the American people, but they stick together because they know if they don't, they won't be there. Thank you for that comment. All right, how am I doing on time? I'm doing good. Okay. We got a few more stories we want to get into. Well, I was going to talk about immigration, but before that, since we're talking about Mike Johnson and the push to oust him, half of senior staffers in Congress are so fed up that they may quit, reads the headline from the Washington Post. Oh, no? I mean, how will democracy survive if we lose senior staffers in Congress? When it comes to job satisfaction, members of Congress aren't the only ones considering calling it quits. Only about 1 in 5 senior aides on Capitol Hill believe that Congress is, quote, functioning as a democratic legislature should, and about the same margin believe that it is an effective forum for debate on key issues. So half of senior staffers in Congress are so fed up they may quit. Well, good. Maybe we can save some money. Those senior staffers are making plenty of money. All right, let's take a short break. No. I've got time. Okay. If you're new to the program, we are now 2 hours long on Frankly Speaking. We will normally have guests. I wanted to see how the first morning went, kind of get the time frame on it, see what how many articles I would need, those type of things. So I thought we're going in sight unseen, no guest on today's show, so that will be changing in the future. Obviously, this was just kind of a test run. It was not an April Fool's joke. We are actually 2 hours now. So if you have anybody you'd like to see on the show, maybe some representative, some local official that you'd like me to interview, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. You can reach out to me at any time and let me know who you'd like to see on the program, or just reach out with your questions, comments, concerns, criticisms. With 2 hours on the air, we have to have conversation to fill some of that time, and that's why I appreciate all the nice comments that people have been sending in this morning. When we come back, we are going to talk about immigration. We have a few things here about the economy as well. Wow, we only got 20 minutes left. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson's studio on Marcus Street in Corning. This will come as no surprise, but it is not nonetheless terrifying. ISIS-K, which I guess is a newish terrorist group, ISIS-K, that is being blamed, for lack of a better term, with that attack in Russia. ISIS-K could slip through the U.S. border and carry out Moscow-style attack, said U.S. officials. Yeah, it would come as no surprise that they would slip through the border. I mean, we have an open, porous border. This is why voters consider this the number one issue. ISIS-K terrorists could cross America's porous borders and carry out an attack like the Moscow concert hall mass shooting that killed 143 people. A U.S. counterterrorism official and expert warned the ultra-violent offshoot of the Islamic State terror group is growing bolder, and its members may try to take advantage of the chaos at the U.S.-Mexico border and seek out a bigger target, a current federal official said. Now they were speaking with anonymity. But an attack on U.S. soil is definitely a possibility, said the source. It would certainly send a message. With more than 256,000 migrant encounters recorded at the southern border in February, and an unknown number of gotaways who slipped through unnoticed, the officials said ISIS-K operatives could slip through undetected. Heaven forbid they could already be. I don't think that's shocking. They could already be here. The concern is only exacerbated by the sharp rise of encounters with suspects on the FBI's terror watch list. Nothing is being done by this administration to correct this. In 2021, Customs and Border Patrol agents stopped 15 suspected terrorists at the southern border, with the following year seeing a dramatic spike of 98 suspects. That's caught, though. We're not even talking about gotaways, which we do have no idea. Last year, a total of 169 terror suspects were halted at the southern border, and since last October, 69 further suspects have been caught trying to sneak through the border. Potentially hundreds of people from the countries where ISIS-K is actively recruiting are believed to be crossing the border each year. We are taking the threat of a domestic ISIS-K attack very seriously, the counterterrorism official said. Well, are we? If we still have open, porous borders. They hate us and everything we stand for, and they're bold, and they're always looking for targets. While most experts say ISIS-K is more likely to target Europe because of its proximity to the group's base of operations, the U.S. border, both north and south, present a substantial... Yes, I did it again. Remember, there are some changes now that we're on 2 hours. My button here that would normally add a wave, that's been moved, and now it's a break. So I keep trying to increase our waves, and I hit the wrong button. So I apologize over that. So we're talking about ISIS-K. We got a response from a viewer. ISIS-K is a group for the globalists wanting to start World War III and then rule with the New World Order after it's all over. Thank you. Keep those comments coming in. So they say they're taking the threat of a domestic ISIS-K attack very seriously, even though we have the open, porous borders. And I don't blame counterterrorism officials for that. I blame this administration. But they hate us and everything we stand for, and they're bold, and they're always looking for targets. While most experts say ISIS-K is more likely to target Europe because of its proximity to the group's base of operations, the U.S. border, both in the north and south, present a substantial terror risk. Quote, the open border is a huge concern for terrorists entering the U.S. in light of attacks in Moscow, said Morgan Lorette, a former U.S. Army captain and Blackwater contractor. It only take, I hate to even read comments like this, but it's only going to take a few of them to get armed and attack a large event, such as a concert, baseball game, Times Square, to bring terrorism to U.S. border or U.S. soil. Well, again, this is why voters deem this to be such a major concern, immigration. Because we understand the seriousness of this. Because, yes, they caught how many? 169 terror suspects were halted since last October. How many got away? How many went, quote, what's the term that they use? Gotaways. How many were, quote, gotaways? And that's why we have the real concern. And to just add to this, what brings more maybe illegal immigration, Adams' debit cards for migrants scheme makes no sense, says Nicole Gelinas, maybe is how you pronounce it. I know it's pretty amazing to me when I have people that don't even live in New York State that I went to school with or whatever texting me and saying, is this really happening? And I said, well, yes, in the city, not in upstate yet, but in the city. After months of delay, the Adams administration Roosevelt Hotel Welcome Center on Monday is finally handing out its first debit cards to migrants staying at the hotels to buy food and baby supplies. The city says it's starting with 115 families, giving each family of four $350 a week over a 6-week pilot. So I'd like to ask you, for those of you that watch this program that are on Social Security, how does that make you feel? This program still raises more questions than the city has answered. When the Adams team told the city's Housing Preservation Development Department in December that it had to use MOCAFI, a small-scale New Jersey-based minority-owned vendor, and not even consider any other firms, the reasoning was that it's an emergency. So why the no-bid single-vendor contract? Taxpayers paid that group $574,000 in January, but Monday is April 1st. So for the first 3 months of this contract, a full quarter of the contract's year-long term, migrants didn't see a dime. Those 3 months plus the months last year that the city spent drawing up its contract were plenty of time to do a competitive bid process. Yeah, there's so many questions on this. How is the city choosing families to participate in this program? A true pilot to see if giving people these cards is cheaper than buying food for them, as the city insists it will be, would have randomly selected participants in a random control group. Without a transparent process for lottery selection, the city risks favoritism. The city workers or contract workers pick their favorite families or people they think, after weeks of observation, are likely to be the most responsible. If families can only buy food and baby supplies, as top city officials said last week, and if the card can only be used at bodegas, supermarkets, and markets, why doesn't the city just buy these products wholesale? That's another great question. Do the debit cards go with the migrants if they leave city shelter? It's city policy to ask migrant families to reapply for shelter after 60 days. But the city is responsible to provide migrants with 3 meals a day as part of the city's responsibility to provide shelter. In other words, once migrants leave city shelter, they must find their own food too. So if and when migrant families find their own housing after 60 days, they'll be able to take their debit cards with them. That's a fair question. Last week, Deputy Mayor Ann Williamson said that we can take a look at it after 6 weeks and see what's working and what's not. Now, Adams is already saying it's a complete win. But a win for who? I think that's a very good point. Well, it's obviously going to lead to more migrants coming to the city. I mean, you're talking $350 a week. That's a good deal. Okay, I'm going to hit the right button this time. A lot of ways come in. Thank you. We're covering a lot this morning. If you're just joining us, we are on 2 hours now with Frankly Speaking. I've got to take a short break as we wrap up today's edition of Frankly Speaking. So get those last minute comments in, and we'll be right back after this short commercial break. We are back with a 2-hour edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody joining us, getting all these great comments. Quote, this is from a viewer. Does anyone think that the leaders of our adversaries and terrorist agencies, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Taliban, ISIS, are stupid? They all hate us and have the opportunity to establish sleeper cells here to attack sometime in the future. I fear it isn't if, but when. And after it happens, the Dems will renew their push to get rid of guns. I worry about, I think it's an if. I agree with you. It's not if, it's when. And I that really worries me, because you're right. It's not just ISIS-K. There's so many examples of our adversaries who could take advantage of this at both the northern and southern border. A couple other comments. Great show. Well, thank you. We're now 2 hours, and I think it's going pretty smooth, I got to say. I'm not just saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying that I'm not too worried about filling 2 hours. I think we're going to have no problems from here till November. Next, all of these giveaways are intentionally by design, set up to break this nation. Just like the never-ending stimulus during COVID, they're masterful at fooling people and buying their votes and allegiance, like free tuition and forgiveness that will most likely never come to fruition. And that's a great point. A lot of this having to do with buying votes, or is that reason. Also, something that you may not think about, education gap. Listen to this. Much of the discussion of the ongoing border crisis focuses on crime, drug importation, and human trafficking. Important as these issues are, however, they should not distract from how the influx is driving up the total size of the immigrant population, legal and illegal, to a level never before seen. It's also contributing to a significant decline in new arrivals' education level. This decline has implications for workers, taxpayers, and our ability to assimilate and integrate so many people. Each month, the government collects the current population survey, primarily to measure employment. The household survey, as it's often called, shows something extraordinary is happening. Since Biden took office, the nation's foreign-born population grew from 45 million in January 2021 to 51.4 million in February of this year, a 6.4 million increase and a new record high. The foreign-born has never grown this fast, this much, this fast. Isn't that interesting? It's something you may not have considered. Creating an immigration system that better serves the country is certainly possible, and we need to focus on that. Finally, on immigration, Georgia lawmakers are to crack down on arrested migrants and immigration status after Laken Riley's brutal murder. Georgia state legislators have approved a Get Tough immigration enforcement bill in the wake of the brutal beating death of nursing student Laken Riley, allegedly by a Venezuelan migrant. The bill now only needs Republican Governor Brian Kemp to sign off on the measure. Quote, while Joe Biden and his liberal allies refuse to protect our citizens and secure our southern border, Georgia Senate Republicans are passing legislation to protect our state from criminal, illegal immigrants. Let us be clear. Sanctuary cities will not be tolerated in Georgia. We're not only a sanctuary city in New York City, we're actually giving away debit cards. So a little bit of a different take on things. Oh, man, we are almost out of time. Finally, I know we've talked about public safety, and never mind how you feel, never mind the victims that you know here in New York State, never mind. It's actually pretty good out there. The New York Times reporting, no, everything's fine. Consumers are unhappy as prices and inflation remain high. Okay, that's accurate. Many Americans are in a sour mood about the economy for one main reason. Prices feel too high. Maybe they're not rising as fast as they had been, but average prices are still painfully above where they were 3 years ago, and they're mostly heading higher still. Okay, so finally some truth out there. But listen to this. Wouldn't it be great if prices actually fell, what economists call deflation? Who wouldn't want to fire up a time machine and return to the days before the economy rocketed out of the pandemic recession and sent prices soaring? At least prices are now rising more slowly, what's called disinflation. So basically what they are suggesting is if prices went down, it would actually be a bad thing. But those incremental improvements are hardly enough to please the public, whose discontent over prices poses a risk to Biden's reelection. We are out of time. Thank you to everybody who joined us at any point of the program. I hope that you were able to catch all 2 hours. That is a regular thing. It wasn't an April Fool's joke. We will be on every weekday morning starting at 6 with Frankly Speaking. So have a great day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow morning, again, starting at 6 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV Big Fox. I look forward to it already.